The wind howled across the mountains like a living thing, not the kind of wind that bends trees and rattles windows. This was the kind of wind that reaches inside a man, finds whatever warmth is left in him, and strips it away without apology. This was the wind of the Alps in late autumn, ancient, merciless, and completely indifferent to the ambitions of generals and the prayers of soldiers. Snow lashed against the faces of thousands of exhausted men. Soldiers who had already marched for months, men who had crossed raging rivers, carved their way through hostile territories, and watched their brothers fall to sickness, ambush, and brutal summer heat. They had survived all of that. And now, they stood facing the most savage obstacle the ancient world could produce. A frozen wall of stone and ice that clawed at the sky like the fist of a god, determined to end them right there. Some men slipped on the frozen cliffs. Some disappeared into the white abyss below, swallowed by the mountain without a sound. Horses collapsed under the combined weight of ice, starvation, and exhaustion. The air was so brutally cold that breath turned instantly to frost, and a soldier's armor became a cage of ice pressed against his skin. Some men froze where they stood mid-step, mid-thought, and never moved again. Their bodies became monuments to the madness of this march. And yet, the column kept moving, not because the path had become safe, not because the weather had shown mercy, not because the mountain had agreed to cooperate with the plans of men. The column kept moving because at the front of that broken, bleeding, shivering army stood a man who had already settled this question long before the march began. A man who looked at the mountains towering above him, at the ice, the cliffs, the howling white void, and issued a single command: keep marching. His name was Hannibal Barca. And what he was doing, in that moment, with that army, against those mountains, would become the most audacious, the most impossible, the most studied military march in the entire history of the ancient world. Roman commanders would talk about it for centuries. Military scholars would debate it for millennia. And still more than 2,000 years later, no one can explain it without pausing to acknowledge something that had nothing to do with terrain, nothing to do with weather, and nothing to do with logistics. It had everything to do with a decision made in the soul of one man. A decision that said, "I will not turn back." This is not just a lesson in ancient history. This is a doctrine for every person alive today who is standing at the base of a mountain that was designed to end them. Because I want to show you today that what Hannibal understood in 218 BC, most people living in the 21st century have still not grasped. And the cost of that ignorance is a life lived at the base of every mountain you were meant to cross. At the height of its power, the Roman Republic believed itself untouchable, and honestly, who could blame them? Rome had armies trained to a precision that no other military force in the world could replicate. The Roman legion was not simply a fighting unit. It was a machine, disciplined, adaptive, relentless. 10. Rome had wealth pouring in from every corner of the known world: silver from Spain, grain from Sicily, tribute from 100 conquered peoples. Rome had strategic roads, naval dominance, political alliances, and a centuries-long track record of turning every threat into another expansion of the empire. Rome had beaten everyone. Every enemy that had ever dared to face them on open ground had eventually been broken. But Rome had something else, something more dangerous than any weapon, more paralyzing than any defeat. Rome had the settled, comfortable confidence of a power that had never truly been surprised. And when an empire stops expecting the unexpected, it has already planted the seed of its own crisis. That confidence had a name. It was called the Alps. Those mountains were not simply geography to the Romans, they were theology. The entire Roman strategic worldview was built on the unspoken assumption that the Alps were an impenetrable natural barrier, a wall constructed by Providence to protect the Italian peninsula from invasion from the north. No army had ever attempted to cross them with a full invasion force. The passes were brutal. The weather was unpredictable. The drops were fatal. Experienced commanders who had campaigned across the known world looked at those mountains and came to the only logical conclusion: no sane general would ever try. So Rome prepared for the threats they expected. They fortified the obvious. They defended the predictable. They positioned their forces along the paths a rational enemy would use: the coastal routes through Spain and southern Gaul, the established roads that gave invading armies their best chance of arriving with an intact fighting force. Rome built their entire defensive posture around the enemy they imagined. They never imagined Hannibal, and this is one of the oldest, most recurring tragedies in human history, not just in warfare, but in every arena of life. The most devastating blow never comes from the direction you were watching. It comes from the place you decided was impossible. The relationship that collapsed was not destroyed by the enemy you feared. It was destroyed by the assumption you stopped questioning. The business that failed did not fall to the competitor you were tracking. It fell to the threat you had decided could never exist. The greatest vulnerabilities in any life are always hiding behind your deepest confidence. Rome's greatest weakness was dressed up as its greatest protection. And this is a truth that should shake every person reading this, because you have Alps in your own mind. Assumptions so comfortable, so long established, so unquestioned, that you have stopped treating them as assumptions at all. You have turned them into walls. And on the other side of those walls, there is an enemy you are not prepared for. Or, and this is the part that will change your life, there is an opportunity you have been telling yourself was impossible. Hannibal Barca understood something that most people never learn, and most generals never survive long enough to apply. The enemy prepares for the road they expect you to take. They fortify the obvious. They defend the predictable. They build their entire strategy around the version of you that makes logical sense, the version that stays on the known path, respects the established rules, and moves in the direction that any reasonable observer would predict. Which means the road that leads to genuine, decisive victory is almost always the road that no one is defending, because no one believes anyone would dare to walk it. When Hannibal looked at the map of the known world in the autumn of 218 BC, he saw something that Roman strategists had looked at 1,000 times and seen something completely different. They saw protection. He saw a door. They saw an impassable mountain range. He saw the one route that Rome had left, completely undefended, because the very brutality of it had convinced the most powerful military force on earth that no one would ever use it. And so Hannibal turned his army, 40 to 50,000 soldiers, thousands of horses, and a contingent of war elephants that had never seen snow in their lives, and pointed them at the mountains. The decision alone was staggering. His own officers questioned it. His soldiers, brave men who had crossed deserts and rivers and fought through Gaul, looked at the white peaks ahead of them and felt something they had not felt in years. Not just fear, something deeper than fear. The particular dread that comes when a man begins to suspect that the person leading him may have crossed the line between genius and madness, and he can no longer tell which side he is standing on. But Hannibal had not made this decision in a moment of passion. He had not looked at the Alps in a flash of reckless inspiration and decided to improvise. This was a calculated, deliberate, carefully reasoned strategy built on a principle that most people never fully internalize. Comfort is not safety. The road that everyone uses is not the road that leads to victory. And the obstacle that everyone agrees is insurmountable is, almost by definition, the obstacle that no one is guarding. Victory, Hannibal understood, would not come from marching the obvious route. It would not come from choosing the path that made sense on paper, the path that preserved the most men, the path that minimized short-term risk. Victory would come from endurance, from the willingness to suffer what no one else was willing to suffer, to cross what no one else was willing to cross, to emerge on the other side of something that the entire world had agreed was impossible. That is not recklessness. That is strategy at its highest form, and it is available to you right now. The journey through the Alps was not glorious. Let me be absolutely clear about that, because history has a way of polishing suffering until it looks like triumph from a distance, and I will not do that to Hannibal's army. I will not do that to the men who actually lived it. It was suffering. Pure, sustained, unrelenting suffering. Blizzards descended without warning, swallowing entire paths and burying the roads that Hannibal's guides had mapped. Cliffs that looked stable from a distance collapsed beneath the weight of a marching column, sending men and horses plunging into ravines so deep the sounds of their dying never reached the men above. Ice formed overnight on paths that had been navigable the day before, turning every step into a negotiation with death. Food ran out. The army had carried provisions for a portion of the journey, but the Alpine passes were longer, harsher, and more labyrinthine than even the best intelligence had suggested. Men began to slaughter horses for food. Then they began to eat whatever they could find in the sparse, frozen vegetation on the mountainside. Some found nothing. They marched on empty stomachs with ice in their lungs, and doubt growing louder in their minds with every step. Cold winds tore through armor and wool and bone, reaching places that no blade had ever touched. Soldiers who survived combat in the flatlands, who had never flinched from a spear or a sword, found themselves undone by weather, weeping not from fear, but from the sheer, grinding, exhausting relentlessness of the cold. Some soldiers froze during the night, curled up in the small shelter they had built from their cloaks, and never woke. Others simply collapsed from exhaustion during the march and were left behind, because the army could not stop. Stopping meant dying, and Hannibal knew it. Entire sections of the force were lost to the mountain, not to enemy soldiers, not to ambush, to rock and ice and cold and the particular brutality of an environment that does not know your name and does not care about your plan. By the time Hannibal's army emerged from the Alps, he had lost a staggering portion of the force he started with. Historians debate the exact numbers, but the accounts are consistent on this. The crossing cost him thousands of men, most of his horses, and very nearly his war elephants. The army that descended into northern Italy was a shadow of what had entered the mountains. And yet, those who remained were not broken. They were tempered. There is a metallurgical truth that the Bible speaks to in the book of Proverbs. Fire does not destroy gold. It refines it. It burns away everything that is not gold, until what remains is the purest, hardest, most valuable form of what was always there. And what came down from the Alps was an army that had been through fire, men who had survived what should have killed them, soldiers who looked at a Roman legion on open ground and thought, compared to what we just walked through, this is manageable. The suffering had not weakened them, it had selected them. Because this is the law that the mountains operate by. Whether those mountains are made of stone or made of circumstance, they don't destroy the worthy. They destroy everyone who was never willing to pay the price. And what remains after the mountain is not the same force that entered. It is something harder, something that has earned the right to be called unstoppable. Weeks after entering the mountains, frozen, reduced, carrying wounds that had not fully healed, with animals that had barely survived, something happened that the Roman Republic had declared impossible. Out of the frozen Alps, Hannibal's army emerged into northern Italy. The news hit Rome like a physical blow. There are moments in history where everything that a civilization has assumed about the world is suddenly, violently revised. This was one of those moments. The Alpine barrier, the wall Rome had treated as permanent, reliable, divinely ordained protection, had been crossed. Not by a small scouting party, not by a handful of desperate fugitives, but by a full invasion force. Exhausted and diminished, yes, but alive, present, standing on Italian soil with weapons in hand and fire in their eyes. The Roman generals who had positioned their legions along the expected invasion routes now had to scramble. The intelligence was wrong. The assumptions were wrong. The entire defensive posture had been built on a premise that Hannibal had just demolished. And, in the terror and chaos of that moment, Rome discovered something that the most powerful institutions in history have repeatedly had to learn the hard way. The threat that comes from the direction you dismissed is always the most dangerous one. Because by the time you know it is real, you have already lost the initiative. What followed is part of the permanent record of human history. Hannibal went on to inflict a series of defeats on Rome so catastrophic that military historians still study them today. At the Trebia River, at Lake Trasimene, and then, in 216 BC, at Cannae, a battle where Hannibal's smaller force encircled and annihilated a Roman army of somewhere between 60 and 80,000 soldiers in a single afternoon. It is considered by many scholars to be the most tactically perfect battle in recorded history. It became the foundational case study that military academies have used for over 2,000 years to teach the art of encirclement. All of it, every single one of those victories, was made possible by one decision, one march, one willingness to endure what no one else would endure, to cross what everyone agreed could not be crossed. The Alps were not just a route, they were the foundation of everything that came after. Because Hannibal did not simply cross the mountains, he crossed the threshold of what Rome believed was possible. And once you shatter that barrier, once you prove, in the most undeniable, visceral, physical way, that the impossible can be done, you are no longer fighting the same war. You are not fighting the enemy's strength. You are fighting their shock, their disorientation, their desperate scramble to revise a worldview that you have just destroyed. That is the strategic genius of the march through the Alps, not the route itself, the psychological earthquake that followed. Most people believe that success belongs to the strongest. We live in a culture obsessed with talent, natural ability, inherited advantage. We spend enormous energy cataloging who started with more, who had better resources, who received better training, who was born into the right circumstances. And there is a kind of comfort in that inventory, because it gives us a reason. It gives us an explanation for why we have not yet crossed our mountain. Someone else had more. Someone else had an easier path. But history does not teach that lesson. History, studied honestly, not the sanitized version, not the highlight reel, but the actual documented record of how human beings have achieved the things that change the world, teaches a completely different lesson. Success belongs to those who outlast the suffering. Not the strongest, not the most talented, not the most resourced. The ones who kept marching when every rational argument said to stop. The ones who refused to let the mountain be the final word. The ones who understood either by wisdom or by stubbornness or by a faith that they could not fully explain that the other side of the suffering was not more suffering. It was the territory that the quitters had vacated, because here is what the mountains actually do. This is the law they operate by, and it is one of the most important things I will ever say to you on this channel. Mountains do not exist to destroy you. They exist to filter the field. Every person who wants what you want is standing at the same base, looking at the same mountain. The dream you carry, the life you are reaching for, the impact you are called to make, you are not the only one who can see it. There are 100, 1,000, 10,000 others who can see exactly the same thing. They have the same desire. Some of them may even have more talent, more connections, more early momentum, and then the mountain arrives. And most of them stop. Not because they are weak people, not because they are bad people, but because no one warned them that the mountain was part of the design. They thought the path was supposed to be clearer by now. They thought the suffering was supposed to end sooner. They thought the promise was supposed to look more like a promise and less like a frozen cliff with ice on both sides and no visible bottom. So they turn back, and the territory opens up for the ones still marching. The Bible says it plainly in Romans 5, "Tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope." Not tribulation ruins everything. Not tribulation suggests God has abandoned you. Tribulation worketh. It produces, it manufactures, it creates the exact qualities that cannot be built any other way. The endurance that only comes from enduring. The character that only comes from being in the fire. The authority that only comes from surviving what you were not supposed to survive. You cannot buy that in a seminar. You cannot inherit it from someone else's story. You have to earn it on the mountain. Today, your mountains may not be made of snow and stone. Your Alps may look completely ordinary from the outside, the kind of obstacle that does not photograph well, that does not generate sympathy, that does not come with a dramatic backdrop or a heroic soundtrack. The mountains in your life may look like rejection letters that kept coming long after you ran out of patience. They may look like a business that is not yet performing the way you planned, a marriage under more pressure than you signed up for, a calling that you are certain of but that has produced nothing visible yet. They may look like discipline, the kind that has to be maintained when no one is watching, when the results are not yet visible. When the gap between where you are and where you are supposed to be is so wide, it seems offensive. They may look like years of lonely effort in a room where no one is applauding and the metrics are not moving, and every rational person in your life has quietly suggested that perhaps it is time to reconsider. They may look like sacrifice, giving up what is comfortable, what is safe, what everyone around you has settled for, in order to keep moving towards something that you can only see by faith. And here is the word I need to say to you today, with every ounce of weight I can put behind it. That is the mountain doing what mountains are designed to do. It is not malfunctioning. It is not evidence that you chose the wrong direction. It is not a sign that God has forgotten you, or that the dream was never real, or that the people who told you it was impossible were right after all. The mountain is functioning exactly as designed. It is doing the one thing it was created to do. It is filtering the field. Every person who stops becomes the gap that opens for the one who continues. Every retreat becomes the territory vacated for the one still advancing. The rejection that sends most people home becomes the silence that amplifies your signal once you outlast the crowd. The years of discipline that most people abandon become the compound interest that makes you unstoppable by the time the season changes. But you have to keep marching. Not with grit alone, because grit without purpose eventually burns hollow. You have to march with the settled conviction that what is on the other side of this mountain is worth every step it costs to get there. That the God who called you to it is the same God who will sustain you through it. That the suffering is not random, it is formative. That the pain is not pointless, it is productive. That the mountain is not your grave, it is your seminary. Someone once said that the greatest tragedy is not death, it is a life lived without purpose. And I want to extend that thought today. The second greatest tragedy is a person with genuine purpose who abandoned it at the base of the first serious mountain they encountered and spent the rest of their life wondering what was on the other side. Do not be that person. You were not built to wonder. You were built to cross. I want to tell you something about Hannibal's army that rarely gets discussed, something that most tellings of this story pass over because it does not fit the clean narrative of heroic triumph. When those soldiers entered the Alps, many of them did not believe they would survive. This was not irrational fear. It was honest assessment. They could see with their own eyes what the mountain was doing to the men ahead of them. They had watched their companions disappear into the ravines. They had felt the cold settling into places it had never reached before. They had gone to sleep, not knowing if they would wake, and they had woken up only to find that some of the men beside them had not. And they kept marching. Not because they had stopped feeling the fear, not because the suffering had become comfortable, not because the mountain had become less brutal. They kept marching because something in them had made a decision that transcended the immediate evidence, a decision that said, the pain I am feeling right now is real, and it is not sufficient reason to stop. That is what I am calling you to today. Not the absence of fear, not the absence of doubt, not a life in which the mountains are removed and the path is made smooth and the suffering is canceled by faith. The Christian life, the real one, not the prosperity gospel counterfeit, does not promise the absence of mountains. It promises a presence that goes with you through them. It promises a God who does not stand at the base of your Alps and say, I'll meet you on the other side. It promises Emmanuel, God, with us in the ice, in the dark, in the frozen pass. In the moment when the cold reaches your bones and the doubt reaches your soul and you cannot see a single reason to take the next step. That next step is an act of faith. That next step is where your theology becomes real. Anyone can believe in God when the weather is good and the path is clear and the results are visible. The faith that changes history is the kind that keeps its feet moving when none of those things are true. The faith that says, I do not understand this mountain. I did not plan for this severity. I have already lost more than I budgeted for. But the one who sent me here has not withdrawn the assignment, so I march. This is the spirit Hannibal carried, and he was not even a man of scripture. He was a Carthaginian general, driven by vengeance and vision. And yet, even without the word of God, even without the promises of the covenant, he demonstrated a principle that the children of the kingdom should walk in with far greater confidence. The decision to keep moving is made before the mountain arrives. If you wait until the suffering starts to decide whether you will endure it, you will not endure it. The question is not answered in the storm. It is answered in the preparation. It is answered in the private moment, before the public crisis. When a man or woman looks at what God has called them to and decides not if it is easy, not if it is clear, not if everyone agrees, but simply, I will not turn back. Make that decision today. Make it now, while the mountain is still in the distance and the cold has not yet reached you. Make it so thoroughly, so completely, so finally, that when the blizzard comes, and it will come, the question of whether to stop is not even on the table, because champions do not decide in the storm, they decide before it. When Hannibal's army came down from the Alps, they had lost men, they had lost horses, they had lost supplies and ease, and the comfort of bodies that had not yet been broken by extreme cold and extreme demand. What they had not lost was Hannibal, and what they had gained, every single one of them, was the knowledge of something they had not possessed when they entered the mountains. Not tactical knowledge, not strategic intelligence, something far more valuable and far less transferable. They knew what they could survive. There is a category of confidence that cannot be produced by training, cannot be manufactured by motivation, cannot be supplied by a mentor or a message. It can only be produced by the experience of having gone through something you were not certain you would survive, and surviving it. By having been inside the thing you were most afraid of, and coming out the other side with your purpose intact. By having stood on the frozen cliff, looked into the abyss, felt everything in you screaming to turn back, and taken the next step anyway. That confidence changes the way you carry yourself in every subsequent battle. The Roman soldiers who faced Hannibal's army at the Trebia River were looking at men who had crossed the Alps on foot. Physically, the Romans may have been rested, fed, positioned on favorable ground, but they were facing something they could not fully account for in their battle calculations. An army that had already decided it would not stop. Men for whom the worst had already happened, and who were still standing. This is what the mountain produces in those who refuse to turn back. Not invincibility, not the absence of further struggle, but an interior settledness, a deep, unshakable knowledge of your own endurance that becomes the greatest strategic asset you can possess. Because every future obstacle is now measured against the Alps. And compared to the Alps, most obstacles are not as large as they first appeared. Every rejection you survive teaches you that you can survive rejection. Every season of discipline you complete teaches you that you can complete a season of discipline. Every mountain you cross gives you a history of crossing mountains, and that history is the foundation of the faith that takes you further than the people who never crossed anything. Your testimony is built in the crossing, not in the arrival, not in the moment you emerge on the other side with the victory flag raised and the story complete. Your testimony is being written right now, in the hardest part of the march, in the part that no one will ever fully understand except the people who were there in the section of the story that you would rather fast forward through. That is where the doctrine is formed. That is where the authority is established. That is where the person who will occupy the other side of the mountain is being made. So let me speak directly to you now. You have a mountain in front of you. You know what it is. You have known what it is for some time. You may have already started the crossing and found it harder than you expected. You may be partway up, in that terrible middle section, where you have come too far to easily turn back, but the summit is still not visible, and the weather has turned against you, and the people who said they would march with you have quietly fallen back, and you are alone in a way that you did not anticipate. Or you may be standing at the base, looking at what the year ahead requires of you, and feeling the very human temptation to find a more comfortable route. A path that does not cost as much. A version of the assignment that looks more reasonable, more sustainable, more socially acceptable. I am here to tell you, that route does not lead to the victory you were built for. The path that everyone agrees is reasonable leads to the destination that everyone reaches. And the destination that everyone reaches is not why God put the fire in your chest. The dream you carry, the calling you sense, in the deepest part of who you are, does not live at the end of the comfortable road. It lives on the other side of the mountain that most people turn back from, which means the only people who will ever reach it are the ones who decide, right now, that they are the kind of person who crosses mountains. You are that kind of person. Not because the crossing will be easy, not because you will not lose things in the attempt, not because there will be no nights when the cold gets into your bones, and the doubt gets into your thoughts, and the gap between faith and evidence feels wider than you can explain to anyone else. But because you were not made for the base camp, you were made for the other side. Hannibal crossed the Alps with an army of imperfect, exhausted, doubting, suffering men. And he crossed them because he had settled, before the first step, that the mountain was not a reason to stop. It was the road to victory. That is your doctrine today. That is your command. So when the mountain appears in your life, and it will appear, because it always does for the ones who are actually going somewhere, do not negotiate with it. Do not ask it to reduce its severity. Do not wait for the weather to improve, or the path to become more obvious, or the people around you to understand what you are attempting. Remember Hannibal. Remember the army that marched through hell with ice in their lungs and purpose in their chests, and not one of them sure they would see the other side and kept marching anyway. Remember that the mountains you face are not accidents. They are not malfunctions. They are not evidence that you made the wrong choice, or heard the wrong voice, or dreamed the wrong dream. They are the filter between the people who wanted it and the person who wanted it enough. Be that person. Hold your discipline when the discipline produces nothing visible. Strengthen your resolve when the resolve has no immediate reward. Maintain your march when the march feels pointless. when the numbers do not confirm the vision, when the silence is deafening and the progress is invisible, and the only thing left is the decision you made before the storm began. Because on the other side of that mountain, on the other side of the suffering you are about to endure, or are currently enduring, there is a territory that has been prepared for those who would not stop. The world does not belong to the comfortable. It belongs to those who are willing to march through hell without turning back. So hold your ground, strengthen your soul, and keep marching. Because victory is not waiting at the easy end. Victory is waiting where the weak turned back and the comfortable went home right there, on the other side of the thing that was designed to stop you. Keep marching. Come back tomorrow, because tomorrow we study another general, another battle, another principle that your life depends on. The march continues.